All right. Greetings, everyone. Today is Tuesday, April 10th, 2018, and this is the weekly meeting for Kubernetes Sig Docs. Let's see. Do we have any new contributors today? I don't see anybody who looks particularly new. I feel kind of new. So if you feel new, hello. I'm with you in solidarity. Let's see. Some updates and reminders. I would encourage folks, if you have not signed up for rotation as the PR Wrangler, the weekly role of shepherding pull requests through our queue, I would encourage you to sign up for a shift on that rotation. If you want to shadow someone else as they do it and use that as a chance to grow more confident, go ahead and sign yourself up as a shadow next to somebody who's already taking that shift. It's actually kind of fun. Let's see. Another reminder from last week's discussion. There is no cookie licking permitted. And in this case, cookie licking is not a disgusting habit, but rather the practice of leaving a comment or anything less than a PR on a comment or on an issue to try and claim it as your own. Short of the way to claim an issue is to open a PR against it, and to do that within 3 days of indicating any interest. Otherwise, issues are fair game.
I would argue that it is in fact a disgusting habit.
Why not both?
Yeah.
Both a disgusting habit and a metaphor. All right, so Jennifer, thank you for pointing out that there are some role limitations for wrangling PRs. Maintainers only, but shadows, you can still join and you can still shadow a wrangler shift and see how it's done. All right. Let's see, moving on to the agenda. The first step that we have is some PR and style guide suggestions from Raji. I've seen a few PRs open from Raji about accessibility guidelines and some capitalization and usage additions. So Raji, is Raji? Yes, Raji's here. Raji, say more about your suggestions.
Okay, the accessibility guidelines, I just started putting up maybe 2 or 3 guidelines that I was familiar with based on my experience in other companies. And I realized that it is much more than that. And the reference link that I have there, that has more details about how you go about with the accessibility guidelines. Maybe we all have to work together, read through the guidelines, and then actually adapt it based on our requirements for this website. And the other one was about capitalization. It was more about just looking for the words. I just saw only 2 words in the IO list, and that's when I started looking up for the words that probably had some consistency, and in some places they were inconsistent, and I added them. So that's the only thought I applied to that, nothing more. Yeah, we need to discuss more on that, yeah.
Okay, so other comments on capitalization and consistency of use?
I added a comment. I admit to being a bit opportunistic here. I added a comment to Raji's capitalization pull request because Joe CC'd the Sig Docs maintainers, only because I thought that it invited us possibly to consider a slightly different but related question about how we call out the names of Kubernetes objects, we're not consistent anywhere, and I doubt very much that we'll achieve consistency, but getting to some practice that we all agree on would be optimal, and trying to at least work towards it, I think might be a good idea. Because so many Kubernetes objects in fact have names that are common words in the land of cluster management, right? They're not just common words, period. They are common words in clusters that you wouldn't necessarily capitalize if they weren't the names of objects. And then we wind up with odd pluralizations of things like persistent volume claim. So I don't want to slide into bike shedding territory here, however. So I will cheerfully back off. I just wanted to call out the comment in the PR.
So this has come up a few times, and we've decided in the past that we're okay to have this trade-off in the interest of not having the style guide be too complicated. And the trade-off we came up with is that if we're going to say persistent volume, we just use it as the API object is capitalized. So it's all one word and it's camel capped. And if it needs to be plural, we just put an S on it, and we understand that that's a shortcut to persistent volume objects. And we've discussed before that sometimes you want to talk about something in the generic, like a node or a persistent volume, and that we might want to write that into the style guide, that we'd make that distinction. But the decision we've come to in the past is that rather than introduce that level of complication and subtlety, we just stick with this idea that if you're going to say the name of something that's a Kubernetes API object, you use the camel casing just as the API object is capitalized, and we just stick with that, unless it's just some really, really compelling case of this just has to be a generic use of this word. So I'm not saying that we have to stick with that, but that's just a little bit of the history of how we've arrived at our current policy of if you're going to say persistent volume, just use the name of the API object.
Yeah, I always have an interesting trade-off of like what benefits the end user, and how much time are we going to spend focusing on capitalization versus like the impact on the end user. So I do think there is like a scope that we should define before we start defining what all the terms are within Kubernetes. I also think that these sorts of things like capitalization and naming should be separate from the style guide in a separate branding guide or terminology guideline, because style is a very different thing. It's sort of collective decisions around content and writing than actually naming, which has a lot of engineering and sort of product sign-off required.
That seems like a useful distinction from a sort of contributor usability perspective too, right? Because we don't want contributors to get bogged down in capitalization details if that's gonna be a hindrance, right? I mean, I appreciated your explanation, Steve, and I really apologize if I was asking for like going over, so a retread. I guess we need to do this periodically, right? It comes down to a question that Steve's raised in the past too. How much do we want to put in the style guide? How much might we want to take out even of the current abbreviated style guide? Because there's a need for solid technical content, and what is sort of too much micromanaging, right? We're constantly trying to figure this out. I guess it seems like this kind of discussion falls somewhat into that category, but separating it out into a word list or a terminology list might help corral it too.
May I suggest using variables for the API objects so that it is not too much of a burden for the contributor? Because when we have it defined as variables, they don't have to worry about capitalization. They'll just stick to what's defined in the variable.
That's an interesting suggestion. I think It's a suggestion that I think deserves more discussion, but it's a suggestion that I think also needs to wait until after we've finished the migration to Hugo. Because any specifics, it's not really possible for us to have a discussion of specifics for variable implementation right now, and until we have migrated fully to the new platform. So I would ask that. I think that's an excellent suggestion, Raji. It's a discussion worth having, but let's defer it until after the Hugo migration.
Sure, thank you.
I think some tooling would definitely be required for that. I also, yeah, like once again, we would still need to define the scope. I'm not sure every single API object would be a variable. But yeah, let's definitely look into that. I think there's some really compelling uses for that.
So if I could just jump in for a minute, there's a couple things that I thought about while I was listening to this discussion. One thing is, it seems like possibly a heavyweight solution to have a variable for every API object type, and it seems like that would drift if it wasn't automated somehow, and if it was automated, I don't know, it seems heavyweight to me. That was one thought. And the other thought is there could be an impact on localization if we decide we always want to use the API object for something like persistent volume. The way that you translate persistent volume in different languages as a noun phrase, that's probably translatable content, but the API object is not going to be translatable content. So that's something for localization people to maybe give us advice about, but I know that I've seen problems like that in the past.
Yeah, there is definitely a sweet spot of string replacement versus full-on automation of variable imports from an API. And we may be able to achieve that balance, we may not. But thank you, Misty. That's localization concerns are really valid.
That jogged a little thing for me too. Who is working on revamping the contributor section? We talked about this last time. Somebody said they would jump on it. Who is that?
Yeah, I'm supposed to be doing that. I think Tom was going to help me, and then Tom bowed out because he said that maybe the real newbies should do it. So I haven't.
To be more specific, what I said was that I think Misty is well positioned to lead it, and that she should assign stuff to me to do, and then I'm happy to help.
This is fun because we're all in different parts of the room, speaking into computers because we don't have a conference room. Yeah, I think Misty, why don't you and I take a swing at reorganizing this, and we can make additional changes. So, because I'm trying to figure out where like a branding guideline would land, and it doesn't look like it would actually land anywhere based on our current organization. So, yeah, let's just making sure there's on all that, and Misty, I'll team up with you and we can work on this now that Andrew's out for the week.
Just looking at the notes for last week, it looks like yeah, Misty, Tom, Andrew, and Jared. But okay.
Yeah, but 3 people on something rarely gets it done. So, Misty, why don't we team up, come up with a plan, and then I'll let you run with it. You can try to help.
Okay. To come back to the initial discussion about accessibility guidelines, Raji, the best way to have a discussion about accessibility is to do what you've done and open a PR, but asking for folks to collectively stop what they're doing, orient themselves around discovery, and then implement a PR based on a consensus discussion. It's not gonna work. We all have many projects in flight, and sort of stopping to dedicate ourselves wholly to one is going to be less effective than simply doing what you've already done and implementing a PR and asking for discussion around it. So I would encourage you to keep doing what you're doing and start bringing in pieces of accessibility. just moving forward with the path that you're already on.
Sure.
Thank you. All right. So speaking of the Hugo migration, the Sig Docs maintainers met with Bjorn Erik Pedersen last week to talk about his 2-day assessment. After 2 days of work on the migration process, he gave us his assessment of what the migration might look like and how long it would take him. The summary from that meeting is that yes, he's going to proceed with migration. So migrating to Hugo is a thing that we are doing, and there were 2 concerns of technical implementation that rose out of that meeting. One was the glossary. The way that we have the glossary implemented right now is the glossary is primarily implemented through scripting, and Hugo has a different tree-based way of handling glossary content. I think the majority of the glossary can be migrated as part of the actual site migration process, but for glossary entries that reference other glossary entries, those are going to require manual intervention. You're going to have to go through and revise those glossary entries by hand to remove any script links inside of a glossary entry to another glossary entry. So that is maybe that could be the subject of a 1-day sprint at some point in later in Q2, Q3. We could knock it out in a bash, but I'm open to other suggestions about how best to do that kind of a glossary fix.
We could build our own fix-it at KubeCon.
Indeed.
Do the glossary for it.
Sorry, I'm just monitoring the chat in the meeting chat. I would like to come back to it, but let me finish with the Hugo migration piece first. The other piece of technical difficulty that arose as part of the migration was the way that we have our site laid out right now. We use YAML files to indicate the structure of the site. It's how Jekyll do is there are YAML files that indicate that give the structure for the table of contents, and what Hugo does instead is it uses a tree-based structure. So it uses the actual directory structure of files to set up the site table of contents. And it's nothing that we needed to, there isn't a lot of heavy lifting involved. If anything, there's less because there won't be any structural YAML files after the migration. It's just something to be aware of, that when we make changes, when we add or remove documents from the site in the future, we won't need to do any YAML configuration associated with that. So it's kind of a cool win.
But we will need to be careful about the file and folder structure, especially when adding new docs, because that's going to determine, I mean, my recollection of the conversation last week is that we're aware that the TOC straight out of the gate is probably not going to be quite what we want it to be, and that we'll need to do some content rearranging to support this approach. But that the eventual result is more than worth the trade-off, or worth the trade-off anyway. Remove hyperbole.
So Docker used to use Hugo, and then we migrated to Jekyll. And I remember that we had front matter in Hugo that it defined the parent for a page, and it also defined the relative weight for the page among siblings, so that the table of contents was sort of manipulatable that way, and I'm not sure if that was functionality that was in Hugo or if that was customization that Docker had, but I know that the directory-based navigation was necessary but not sufficient. And I don't really, I mean, I don't know the details because we migrated to Jekyll fairly quickly. But that's maybe something to think about. I think there may have also been issues about having the same page appearing in multiple parts of the navigation, which is something that you sometimes need.
Interesting.
I don't think we
just lessons learned that we may need to do some smoke tests or something like that about how the navigation works as we go through the migration.
Absolutely. So we don't really weight our TOC right now, except for order in just how things are actually ordered. So it'll be really curious to see what the default weighting is for Hugo, whether that reverts to alphabetical or how that's arranged.
I think that it is alphabetical, and then you can weight things. So pretty much I believe that the only unit of organization is what the parent node is. And then siblings within a node, I think there may be a way to manually weight. I mean, of course you could assign a weight to every page. That's difficult to maintain when you add new pages. I'm not sure if there are decimal points in there or not, but anyway, it's maybe something that we should explore because there may also be multiple ways. It's possible we could still use YAML with Hugo if we wanted to have the fine-grained control, or maybe of some parts of the TOC.
Interesting.
I don't know.
Thank you. I'm just going to make a note really quick to follow up with Bjorn about that.
Yeah, that seems like that's a pretty important piece of information. I mean, my understanding clearly is partial. If the content tree is default ordering alphabetically, then what I thought we were discussing around organization of files is a moot point.
Okay. Well, I mean, we'll see.
Right. Right. Well, as you said, Zach, something to follow up on.
Sure. Marcus, so to come back to the chat, from Marcus, absolutely, maybe I could say that the changes make sense. Marcus, do you want to say more?
Yeah, that was kind of just related to Misty's comment back then. So once the contributor guidelines are updated, I'm more than willing to give my opinion as well if this makes sense or not. Because currently I'm a bit lost. So like 3-4 things in the docs where I would like to make some contribution, updates, and also improvements. But yeah, like until I fully understand how it actually works or the workflow works, it feels like kind of a waste of my time and your time as well.
Okay, so Misty, would you please loop in Marcus in for the contributor guideline reviews, and Raji as well?
I will, but I'm brazenly not going to wait until I understand everything to start contributing, because I have a feeling it'll be a long time, if ever, before I understand everything.
That's real.
Could I toss something out here about the contributor guidelines that's not content related? And Andrew's not on the call, and I think he might be the person with the answer to this question, but one of the I go to the contributor guidelines all the time to check things that I don't remember because I have contributor guidelines to refer to. And even, they are suboptimal, but there's still information there that I need to check. And right now, if I go to the doc site, I don't find an obvious place without scrolling around or navigating through too many clicks to land on the actual page where the TOC shows up. So we've kind of user journeyfied the docs contribution guidelines to the point where they're hiding behind a few too many layers. And I think that's something we could fix even before the content Having said that, I think I can imagine what a PR for that would look like even, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think a PR for that would look like contribute is a top nav item in Docs. Like
yeah, in the horizontal
setup,
bar,
concepts,
the horizontal nav part. Yeah,
resources,
yeah. So it's
reference,
go to site, one click. Yep.
I noticed that pretty immediately, and thanks for seconding my concerns on this.
So, is there a way we could actually guide the new contributors through the chatbot conversation that they could have, so they're directed to the specific topic or the question or the answer that they're looking for, rather than going through the whole documentation?
I haven't used the chatbot. Does the chatbot already exist, or
No,
is that
no.
a proposed idea?
Yeah, it's a proposed idea.
Oh,
So
okay.
I just looked up at
then yes, I guess we could in concept, but I don't know how to implement it.
Well, the user journeys currently have some, set of buttons where you say, who am I? I'm a contributor, and what do you want to contribute to Docs? And then it gets you there. But maybe we could fine tune that with more of a, what do you want to do? I want to, open a pull request, or it'd be phrased even more generically than that. I want to make a contribution to the Docs. That's maybe different.
Like I see a problem. I see a typo, or I want to write new content.
Yeah, right. But anyway, I wonder if we're not finding we're not finding our way to the contributor guide because we're familiar with the way it used to be, or if it's just not that easy to find. Because I had that same experience. I thought, well, where the heck did the contributor guide go? But it's because I was expecting it to be where it used to be. But I think if we go in with fresh eyes to the user journeys that are on the home page, it's not that tricky to find, okay, who are you? Contributor, and is it Docs or code? And there you are. So I think I'm all for making it easier. But I do think those of us who are familiar with the old way have to be careful to look at it with fresh eyes.
So
how well does search work for finding, say if I needed to find something relevant to me, is search a reliable tool for that?
It works reasonably well in the Kubernetes site. Sometimes it'll pop you out of the site, but usually I find it works reasonably well.
And is there a way to optimize content in the site for that search feature?
It's a good question. I've honestly never.
The only thing I know of is the usual way of, your heading, your first.
You should be able to control what
things that normally make you rank better. Sorry, what was that?
You should be able to control what's being indexed. I have no idea what you guys are using for search, but whatever the search tool is, you should be able to tell it which part of the text is important. Sometimes like the first 100 words, or sometimes the keywords in the heading, or whatever. I'll say that for searching, I just searched for contributor, and contributor guide was the #1 result. So I don't know if I was a contributor, if I would be searching for contributor. I have a hard time putting myself in the shoes of somebody who doesn't know what the document is called. So that's maybe if we could do some user acceptance testing on, I don't know if that was done on the doc site redesign. I wasn't quite here yet, but it would be interesting to maybe at Write the Docs or something like that, if we could get some people who aren't actually familiar with the content at all, and maybe give them some tasks to do and see what happens when they do the tasks. That kind of testing for how people are really using the site might be an interesting thing to do.
Yeah, I think speaking on behalf of Andrew, I think I think the original Docs page was the contributor page. So you would land on the Docs home, and it would just say, this is how you contribute, and then here's the section. So when people landed on that page, they were kind of confused. They're like, I don't want to contribute, I just want to read the content. So there was a flip there. But I think we've gone extremely in the opposite direction where the contributor content is impossible to find. So I think I don't know.
No, Jared, I don't agree with that. It's what I was just saying is that it's not impossible to find. It's very few clicks on our homepage to get there. It's different for sure, and it may be we need to do better, but impossible to find is way too strong a statement for what we have.
And that's fair. I don't think it's impossible to find. I think I'm exaggerating. It is, but it's not exactly in a logical place that you expected it to be.
From my experience, I think all the content is there. It's just not too accessible. It's hidden. So probably based on the experience of the contributor or how new or how old they are, the search were different. So that would become more context driven. So the content is already there. We only have to present it to them in what context they're looking for.
I don't think it's even accurate to say that it's hidden. If you go to the documentation page and you scroll all the way down to the bottom, or you do Control F, then you see everything.
So I don't know how much time we have, Zach, for drilling down on this, but if we do have time to discuss this a little longer, can you present our homepage?
1 second, I just need to look at the agenda. Looks like the only thing that we have left is a proposal from Joe Heck about some more heavyweight CSS, but I don't see Joe here. So I think we can defer that discussion and continue this one. I do want to jump in though, and I want to separate out this, I want to separate out what we're talking about. Let's remember that this in the initial proposal that Raji is talking about is implementing a chatbot. So let's talk about searchability and information architecture separately from implementing a chatbot. Implementing a chatbot is an interesting idea. It also sounds to me pretty heavyweight. It sounds like that would be all of the effort that we could put into implementing a chatbot might be better directed at improving our information architecture. So in terms of let's implement a chatbot to solve this problem, do folks have an up or down, just an easy up or down on, is the chatbot the right way to go? Is the chatbot the right thing to try and implement? Is a chatbot the solution to the information architecture discussion on the other side of this question?
I think the chatbot sounds like a super complicated way to attack the problem and not something that a lot of people would be expecting to have on an open source doc site. I don't think that I would use it, but maybe I'm kind of a power user.
Yeah, I'm unsure if I would use it either. And I'm also unsure of how to integrate it into the existing workflow or the tooling necessary for it. I do think the problem that it's trying to attack is important, and I think it's well stated. Finding and guiding people through contributor content. We don't do a good job of it, and we need to improve it. But I don't think a chatbot makes a lot of sense to me.
I guess I would hate to see the effort to create a chatbot take priority over cleaning up content, right? It seems as though that's the first order of business, right? Folks are not landing, and I'm not talking about navigation here, I'm talking about the project that Misty's leading to, presumably, improve the information architecture, start with what really feels like a true entry point for first-time contributors and build from there. I'm being very general here because I'm not trying to make any assumptions about.
Jennifer, I'm going to ask you to instead be very specific and focus on the chatbot.
So I'd like to see us focus on that work first, and then if we decide that a chatbot could help, sort of improve the presentation of the content, I guess I think best case for a chatbot is let's defer. I'm certainly not in favor of front loading it right now when it comes to content issues.
Okay.
If I could add to that, I think that, so we think about what is the goal that having a chatbot accomplishes. That is surfacing information that the user needs when they need it by having them type what they need. And there's a lot of overlap in that model with a model that uses search to do the same thing. And so which is a more common and easier to implement method of working on it, so that the effort that would be put into a chatbot went instead into better search optimization, then maybe we accomplish the same goal.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is a pretty broad consensus that chatbot is not the way to go right now, and improving general discoverability of documentation is the better way to go. Okay. So now let's talk about information architecture, and I am going to share my screen, if I can find among the many. Okay, can you all see that okay? All right, now Steve, where would you like me to go?
Documentation. Okay, so this is the newly designed, front door to the docs, and front center there we see a button labeled contributors, okay? So if people are finding this difficult to find, and now what do you want to be, a docs contributor or a code contributor, or is this difficult for people to click contributors and then click docs contributor?
My very, very first thought on that is when we go to the I am, I think maybe we should not be using nouns. I think we should be using verbs.
Yeah.
I think maybe it should be contribute to ... and then the choices should be docs or code or community. Maybe.
Okay.
I don't know, like obviously you'd want to prove that with some kind of testing, but it seems to me that docs contributor just makes a lot of button text, and also docs and code are the same number of letters and have similar letters in them. That's kind of hard to visually parse. Like that's kind of a dumb thing to say, but that just jumped out at me.
It's not hard to change either.
Yeah. At any rate, since this is our most recent attempt at putting a front door on the docs, this, I think, is where we should concentrate our efforts. If we're going to improve discoverability, we should first look here and say, what's working here and what's not working here, and how could we make this better?
So one thing that I think would help, I think that a lot of people have been really trained on the internet to expect a left nav. And I know that we specifically went away from a left nav, but I wonder if there's a way that we could make it optional to have a left nav. I think some people probably just feel insecure because they can't see all the context of where they are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that comes back, Jennifer, to your suggestion for all the nav about having at least an easily discoverable or an easily selectable way of revealing and getting to that left nav bar for the site.
What Misty said is exactly to the point, that wanting the context. It's not, I mean, I have to keep clicking. The next part of the user journeys separates out the different components. This is a somewhat I mean, I remember when we talked about this, and Andrew and I worked on this page, and this is a really artificial attempt to shoehorn the docs contribution guidelines into the model that we'd already established for the code, for the Kubernetes user journeys. So that's a piece of history there. There's some artificial attempt to create parallelism here. And this is where my brain falls over. It's like, okay, I know I need to click on one of these, and then I will get to the page where I can see all the left nav and, sort of remember which bit it is that I actually need to look up. But we're at how many mouse clicks now? And my brain is still going, wait a minute, I don't remember quite which one of these my bit falls into. Now, I'm an experienced user, I don't know about power user, but so that's, possibly not what we want to optimize the content for. I would just like to suggest that for those of us who need to refer often, all the navs might be a nice alternative. And I know you can keep scrolling down. That means you need to keep scrolling down. I'm not even sure it shows up here. Oh, yeah. Okay, it does. Eventually, very bottom. And that, again, is a piece of the story of optimizing this page for the Kubernetes content, not the contribution content.
What are the numbers? What are the numbers about, like O2 contributing to the Kubernetes docs?
So, Steve, do you remember? I remember we talked about this with Alex Contini, the designer. My recollection is that it's an artifact of a framework that was non-trivial to get rid of, and because we were shipping MVP, we lived with them. But I might not be remembering that right.
I think that's right. I think it's something we lived with, and we talked about, the visual effect of using bullets or icons or numbers, and we ended up just kind of going with this and for the first version, but figured we had to address it later.
Yeah. There's no solid usability or design reason for the numbers. It was a ship MVP thing.
All right.
Oh, I'd like to, hear from several people about. We've heard people are, really want a left nav. That makes sense to me. What other things are not happening on this homepage when you first come to it?
Why are there not in the About section? It would seem to me that there should be an About Kubernetes. Like that would seem to be the thing one that needs to be in the About section. But I guess we decided About means a different thing from maybe concepts or something.
That was another attempt at just where the heck are we going to put these two things? And we just stuck them in this section about the Kubernetes docs. It's not about Kubernetes. So all these things need to be rethought and made better.
Yeah, I think the about section at the very bottom is more just kind of a catch-all about content and docs.
Yeah.
Those might be like that just might need to be renamed to just doc specific content. But that's just hanging out there.
This is sort of supposed to substitute for having the left nav. But I guess what I'm more interested in right now is at the top of the page, what needs to be different. I'm not sure people get to this bottom stage that much, but the general experience is I'm having trouble finding this or that. Then I think at the top of this page, that's where we need to try to do better. So having a left nav is one concrete suggestion that might help. What else might help here?
I know that when I keep talking and I'll try to shut up a little bit, but when I first saw this redesign, I hadn't yet joined. And I remember feeling insecure about what it was going to show or hide when I clicked a button, because it's pretty clear that the buttons are supposed to be filtering content. And I just have this feeling of insecurity that if I click something, that means I won't see things.
Okay, that makes sense. And the left nav should help with that, I would think. Is that right? You see it that way?
Maybe so, or even if the things that were hidden were kind of there but grayed out, that probably wouldn't help with page clutter. I don't really know. I just think people get trained in how to experience websites, and there's sort of like certain archetypes of websites, and this doesn't fit any of those. So I think people may have trouble just accepting this and trusting the way that it works just because it's so different. I can't really think of another website that seems to work like this.
I think of it from a user I think of it from kind of a user journey point of view, where a beginning user like me wants to click a button and read the whole guide, and by virtue of doing that, I kind of get a feel for where the information I need lives, even though it might be hard to find it later. And so then as a more advanced user, after I've done it a few times, to Jennifer's earlier point, like there's a specific thing I need, and I want to be able to get to that quickly because I know, like, my hand just knows where in a left nav to go to click that, or it knows what to type into the search box to bring up that page or that section of that page that I need to do it. And so thinking of the user journeys in that way, like where one is linear access and the other is random access, kind of might help to structure the navigation bits.
The reason I think the reason Andrew launched this whole project was, I mean, there were the two ends of this are, the way it used to be is we felt like there was so much there that people couldn't even imagine where to start. So this was the design to help you narrow down what you're going to look at depending on what you're interested in. And now at the other end, there's this, which leaves people feeling a little nervous that they're not seeing the whole picture, right? So it's tricky for whatever that's worth. I don't have an opinion on it, which is better, but I see that as the tension. The reason we got to this is because we were feeling like there was just too much to look at all at once.
I think a core principle for me with tech writing is that tech writing is not supposed to be shiny. It's supposed to get out of the way. Like, this is sort of the same kind of thing where we say we use repetitive language. We don't use fancy language. We use the simplest terms we can. We use good typography so that things are readable. I sort of think like we don't need to be too fancy with the design of the site for the same kind of reasons. Like, I don't think it should be ugly and like boring. It should be shiny if that's a thing, but I think it just needs to be super obvious to use and get to the stuff people actually want to read.
Can we just, like, I'm finding this conversation to actually be kind of unproductive. Like, Andrew's not here to actually defend this work and to explain it and to describe the work that he's done.
I can speak a little bit.
And I feel like he's put a lot of work into this. There was a ton of research that went into like the decisions that he made.
Well,
so I feel like
Jennifer and I were both in on the effort.
Yeah, and I can speak a little bit to the history of this because my recollection is that Andrew, when he launched the project, it came out of conversations that he and I had. No, Misty, I didn't mean to take it as a criticism.
No. So I'm so sorry to interrupt, but we have a Joe here, and I would like to suggest that we continue this discussion offline, maybe move it to Slack, but definitely continue the discussion of how best to increase user happiness and how best to optimize how we present information, but continue that as an offline conversation.
One thing before, because it's kind of crappy to hand it off like on that note. I just want to add that I know that this was always a sort of minimum viable product, and there was always an effort to do a lot of revamping on this. So like, if Misty, your feedback, and Tom, your feedback, totally welcome. Let's take this offline to Slack and make the updates that need to happen. So, and with that, Joe.
So, Joe, let's talk about CSS and
thank you.
Cross-browser CSS help.
No, that's great. This is real simple. I need help with CSS, especially someone who's familiar with cross-browser implementations, because that's the thing that's buggering up the Safari pull down of the different prior versions. It's only Safari, and I've been unable myself to kind of figure it out. I've taken a number of stabs at it over the couple of days, but I am just a weak punk when it comes to CSS. So I'm hoping that somebody else here knows someone who we could drag into this and say, please help us understand what we've messed up here and how we can fix it.
Cool. All right.
I volunteer Andrew.
That poor bugger. He's out. You're screwing him.
I could feel his gratitude washing over the horizon.
Actually, to that point, is Alex Contini someone who knows, or I'm sorry, somebody was saying something. I walked over.
Yeah, this is Nick. I was just saying I'm not an expert in CSS, but I'm fairly decent. So if you want to ping me, I might be able to help you.
Okay, cool.
Nick,
if you wouldn't mind looking, got it. If you wouldn't mind looking at the bug, there's a lot of detail in there related to it already. So that might give you a step up. It's bug 7801.
Okay, thanks.
Cool.
No, thank you. I really appreciate it because I'm lost and confused.
All right, so we've got about 5 minutes left. Any last minute additions to the agenda?
Oh, I was just going to mention that if you're interested in that page and the user journeys, Friday morning there's a meeting of the working group for the user journeys.
Yeah, you kind of broke up, but I think you were mentioning that there's a working group for user journeys that meets on Friday.
Yep.
And should folks ping you, Steve, for an invitation?
Andrew.
Okay.
The other thing that we can do is stick links to the planning docs for the project in the channel so that people can take a look at the sort of documentary history of it. I'm not sure how well that's going to translate into understanding how we got to where we are, but it's what we've got in the way of an archive, says your resident archivist.
Cool. All right. Last chance. Done. That's a SIG meeting. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.